The India Today E-Conclave. As sales crash, revenues tank and cash flows dry up, India Inc. wonders what happens next. We've embarked upon phase 3 of the Great Indian Lockdown, and the biggest question now is, how do we start reviving the economy without jeopardizing the fight against the coronavirus? Joining us for this very important conversation is a heavyweight panel of key industry voices. I want to start by introducing Dr. Sangita Reddy, Joint Managing Director, Apollo Hospitals and President of the Federation of Indian Chambers of Commerce and Industry. My next guest is special. He used to be my first boss at Aaj Tak as the former news director of the TV Today network, and now joins us in his exalted avatar as the President of the Walt Disney Company Asia Pacific and Chairperson of Star India, Mr. Uday Shankar. Uday, welcome. Big business thinks that a lot of focus has been on micro and small and medium enterprises, and that bigger companies too desperately need help. Joining us is Pati Singhania, Vice Chairperson and Managing Director of JK Papers and Director of the JK Organization. For a sense of what's happening in the financial services sector, we're joined by Rashesh Shah, Chairperson and Chief Executive Officer of Edelweiss. I want to start by asking Uday about each of the sectors and then dive into what needs to be done going forward to try and revive the economy. So that if you can kickstart this conversation by explaining what's been happening largely in the media sector, how much of an impact are you seeing as a result of the pandemic, and what are the trends you're noticing at this moment?
Thank you, Rahul, first of all, for that flattering introduction. We go back a long time, and since then you become bigger, more powerful and more influential, and more power to you. On the question, I think media sector has seen an unprecedented devastation. Between the three segments of entertainment, news and information, and live sports, two of them are totally shut, and those are the much bigger segments, as you know. And there is no film shooting happening, there is no television production happening, there is no live sports happening. News is the only thing that's working. And on the advertising side, if you see this, because there is no manufacturing, no distribution, no retailing, as a result of that, there is really very little advertising happening. So, the advertising sector is somewhat of a bellwether sector. It represents what happens to the industry, and it generally tells you the story earlier than any other sector. So, because the first thing that people do when tough times come is to cut down their advertising, because if they don't see that there is a purpose to advertising by way of selling more goods, they start cutting down on that. And we've seen widespread discontinuation of advertising all over. So, advertising today is barely 20% of the normal levels. And going forward, we suspect that it might get even worse.
Rashesh Shah, can you give us a sense of what's happening in the financial services sector, especially in the stock markets? We've seen after an unprecedented fall in April, there's been a sharp rise just over the past few weeks, and people are wondering, scratching their heads and wondering what's changed so dramatically. Leave what happened today, but broadly, how are you making sense of the jump that we're seeing and what's been happening in your view in the financial services sector?
I think overall, as Uday said, this is a very unprecedented environment, and I think April 2020 will go down in history as a month that I don't think anybody in business or industry has ever experienced. A lot of companies, their revenues came down to zero. Companies were almost in a shock. So I think when this started around the last week of March, which also happened to be the end of the financial year for us, which is a very crucial week in any case, I think there was a state of shock, and investors all over the world, not just in India, just could not comprehend or understand how much impact, how much devastation this is going to cause. But what has happened in the last few weeks in India and globally, a lot of the interventions have happened. The Reserve Bank of India, the Government of India is working, other governments, other central banks have stepped in and at least assured that they are prepared to do whatever it takes. Of course, we in India need to do a lot more, and we can talk about it on liquidity as well as stimulus and all. But I think April gave a sense of comfort that things may not be will get very, very bad. Not as much as the markets and investors had panicked earlier, but it will
But
be
what's
painful.
giving the markets hope? Because at this moment, you don't know how soon industrial activity will kickstart. Demand is uncertain. We don't know when consumers will go back to markets, start purchasing, and yet somehow the stock markets seem to believe that things aren't quite as bad as everyone believes they are. So what is it that the stock market's figuring that nobody else is?
See, again, I think, markets are always hard to understand because so many voices get synthesized out there. But I think overall what happened in April is what I'm saying. I think in March and early April, people panicked. They expected the worst. I think now the sense is, A, with the Reserve Bank and other central banks stepping in, people think there is a floor to how bad economic activity can get. B, people know that things were as bad as they can get in April. And very often the markets are forward-looking rather than backward-looking. What you said is absolutely right. Consumers may not come back. The panic and confidence will take time. But we saw this in April. April was the month with zero sales for most industries. Auto industry had zero sales in April. So will maybe as bad as April, maybe it will be a slight improvement over April. And with the interventions from central banks and government and interest rates coming down, especially for India, I think the three good things that are happening for India is, one is oil prices have come down. In the long term, this is great for India. B, inflation has always been a problem, and we are no longer talking about inflation. So RBI is free to cut rates, inject liquidity without really worrying about inflation. And three, as the global supply chains reorient themselves away from China, just from a risk diversification point of view, India could be, and I should say could be, not automatically we will be, but India could be one of the beneficiaries of that. So after the initial shock is over, people are saying maybe things will not get as bad as we feared, but it will be painful, but it will improve.
Dr. Sangita Reddy, there's been so much focus during this pandemic on the healthcare sector, the pharmaceutical sector, and yet hospital chains are crying, saying that because of COVID patients, the regular business has been hit. Can you at the outset give us a sense of how your sector is grappling with this pandemic and what are the issues you're noticing?
So I think clearly, Rahul, the first thing that there's a brave heart and there's some tremendous heroes in the healthcare sector. But the fact of the matter is that also the numbers are very frightening, in fact, because on one hand, you have many hospitals who had zero revenue or zero income, especially the smaller nursing homes. They all have significant bank loans that they've taken. They definitely have to maintain their entire staff and team. And those who are working with COVID patients are now having to spend a lot more because COVID protection equipment, new medicines, new training. And also from now onwards, the protection which need to be taken to ensure that other infected patients don't come in and infect the existing patients in the hospital. So hospitals are definitely facing a significantly challenging times right now. And they need support, they need encouragement. But the image, I think, in our mind is of helicopters showering flowers on hospitals and brave nurses and brave doctors. So they're ready, they understand the fight, but they require support.
Okay, so what kind of support is required? We'll get to in just a moment. But before that, I want to go across to Pati, Singhania and understand for the entire JK group, and since there's so many diversified portfolios that you deal with, and also especially for the paper industry, what are the kind of problems you are noticing and how are you dealing with them during the period of the pandemic? Singhania.
Hi Rahul, thanks for having me on this show. Basically the issue, as my colleagues have said, is that everything came to a standstill. So actually there was no manufacturing across all our businesses, barring a couple of businesses which were in essential services. And which is true not just for our group, for all of India. So I don't think anybody has ever had a situation when every manufacturing activity has virtually come to a standstill. Now, be that as it may, so today you have industry which has overheads, which have costs, and with zero revenue, how do you manage that? So that is the real issue. Along with this, really we have to now, you talked about lockdown 3.0, let me rephrase it to say it is opening up 3.0 now, which is the good news. And therefore we now need to see how are we going to get businesses back to an even keel. We have already started, for example, some units in our group. The issue, Rahul, is that starting up a manufacturing enterprise is somewhat easier than the front end, which is the selling side. So really what we need at this point is how do we create demand and how do we generate demand? And number two, how do we bring confidence amongst people, consumers, society, all of us, you and me, that it is okay and we need to get back. Because one aspect, if I may say, is that even after the lockdown is over, and even after these 2 weeks, when you and I step out onto the streets, it's not that the coronavirus is gone. It is not something which is going away. So we'll have to live with it. And within this environment, how do we normalize economic activity and our lives?
Ms. Naina Kidwai, in a global context, how badly hit is the Indian economy when compared with other countries and especially those in the relatively similar weight category? We've had the most stringent lockdown, and that also means that the economy has been shut more so than elsewhere.
I think, Rahul, it just the magnitude that hits us, we take pride and in fact hope in the fact that our GDP estimates for the year are going to be at 1.7%, and there are many countries that are going to be in negative territory. But don't forget that we have fallen from 7 to 5 and down to 1.7. These countries were already down at that 0-1% level before they've gone. So the magnitude of fall for a country like ours is actually more of a worry. I would just say that the lockdown has been a great success in terms of what it set out to achieve. The challenge now is to make sure that we can get industry up and running at the earliest. And you've heard some great observations by my colleagues, both supply side and demand side. And I would only just say that as we look at this, there's a FICCI study which has just a survey which suggests that 60% of industry believes it will take 9 months to get back to normalcy, and the balance 40% are at 1 year. So what we have to try and do is to ensure that we can shorten the period by which industry gets back to normalcy. And for that, it is going to require a Herculean but highly achievable challenge if government and industry work together. But the fact that support is needed, it is needed today, whether by MSMEs or by large industry, is a given. And the sooner we can get this going, the better.
Firodia, Motwani, the auto sector in particular, and I'm not just talking about kinetic green energy, but the auto sector per se was already facing massive headwinds even before the pandemic hit. And now company after company is reporting zero sales, zero, not as a metaphor, but zero as a literal numeric, zero sales for the month of April. How badly hit are each of the companies given the flat sales, zero sales, and what are you making of the trends during the pandemic?
Well, I think you're right that this is an unprecedented situation where the auto industry was already suffering from a very poor year due to various macroeconomic factors and the move to BS6, and this lockdown and the virus has come at a really bad time. The industry is really concerned now about the ability to get operations restarted and the ability to generate demand. I think on both these fronts there is a great concern. When I speak about restarting, right now there are some relaxations that have been announced. But if you look at the areas in which the auto industry operates, most of the zones are in red. So very few companies are actually able to open up. Secondly, most of our suppliers are in various areas, and unless you open up the supply chain as well as the dealerships, there is no point in starting manufacturing. It's like if you have to make a vehicle, you need all the parts. You can't have a car without the steering wheel. So I think that it would be quite important to work together to look at the entire sector and have a top-to-toe, end-to-end solution to restarting the economy and the automotive sector in particular. We need our suppliers to be able to commence operations, and we need our dealers to be able to sell the vehicles. And I think this would need a lot of effort and a coordination between the industry and the government to see that important sectors like the auto sectors are given all the support to be able to start quickly and to get production up and running, and also to bring customers back to the showrooms, to bring labor back to the factories. So I think we have a big task ahead of us, and with all the efforts, we can only expect to recover some of the losses that we have seen in the last few months.
So in the first 10 minutes, we got a cross-sectoral sense of the problems that different sectors are facing. I now want to deal with what can be done immediately to start ventilating the Indian economy. Now, rarely has there been such a simultaneous social and economic disruption in the country. This has led to social shocks, economic shocks. What is your idea about what can be done right away to try and ensure we can start reviving different sectors of the economy, in particular the media sector as well?
So, look, I think the lockdown was absolutely necessary. It's been an absolute success. Just about 1,300 deaths or so. India is one of the most sterling stories as far as containing the spread of the virus is concerned. Now we need to do something equally radical in order to kickstart the economy, because we should appreciate the fact that it's not a pause, Rahul. It's a reset, and every part will have to be kicked back into action, because it won't start firing again by itself. So, and unless one Sulajja was talking about, you have to restart the whole supply chain for manufacturing to start happening, from the suppliers all the way up to the dealers. But it's the same thing about the economy, because our economy is so integrated that it's tough to take a slice of it and say, okay, we will start restarting it. It's not a modular economy, because, you need people. We decided to do a lockdown. Lockdown was unilateral decision by the government, highly required and very successful. But to restart, you need to collaborate everybody. The people who work, migrant laborers, whether they're blue collar, white collar, or whatever, if they have disappeared, they first need to come to the plants for things to start happening. Even in my sector, for instance, not a single television show or film is being made today. And these shows, for them to be made, they need representation from all walks of life, and people come from all parts of the country to make a show. So a makeup artist who was probably a migrant from Eastern UP or Bihar, if that person has gone away, that person needs to come back. And so does the technician, and so does everyone else. So we need, it's not an easy problem to solve because of the interlinkages. And people have gone away. They need to first be confident that it's okay to come back, and that they are not going to come back only for them to walk into even
no, but you said that a dramatic
risk.
problem requires a dramatic solution. So what are your out-of-the-box ideas about what this dramatic solution can be, which is also feasible and doable for the government?
So I think first and foremost, we need to start stimulating both supply and demand. People have gone out of, their earnings have been disrupted very badly. It's now 6 weeks and a few more weeks perhaps before they can start coming back to work. A lot of people's incomes have gone totally dry. We need to put money in their hands. Government has done a great job of putting some money so that they survive, but a lot more needs to be done on that front, and a lot more needs to be done in urban India. Sometimes we equate poverty with rural, and we forget about the degrading and absolutely brutal effects of urban poverty. Because in an urban area, if you do not earn for a day, it's difficult to survive. And even in the urban area itself, the entire industrial economic activity is happening, whether it is manufacturing, services, etc. So we need to make sure that these people are brought back. These people have the ability to support themselves in terms of coming back to where they were, and they are assured of getting their employment. And that is not an easy problem. We've been hearing noises around. Everybody needs to get, we must all make sure that everybody remains employed. And that's a very laudable goal, but that can happen for a month, 2 months. But after some time, the entrepreneurs and business owners will just run out of capacity. I will give you an example. We have about 8 to 10 million people who work in retail sector in India. These are just small people who work as salesperson in a shop, delivery boys, etc., and they have been out of work. How do these people? How are they going to get money? They cannot get money even if we put pressure on their employers to give them money, because the employer himself or herself has run out of any resources. So we do need to do a very, very radical program of putting money in people's hands, and also then supporting entrepreneurs and businesses who have to employ these people, so that for some time, they have already built a liability. The thing that we miss sometimes is that 6-8 months of shutdown of this kind, no matter how important and inevitable it was, it has also set businesses back for a long time.
But Pati Singhania, the reality is, if sector after sector is crying for help, the government's focus from all accounts in the public domain is on micro, small and medium enterprises, saying that's where they need to ensure that companies stay afloat. They're hoping that the big boys of India Inc. can take care of themselves. They have adequate reserves, they have adequate wherewithal to be able to last out this storm without sacking employees. Do you think that's feasible? Or as Uday says, that that's not going to be enough, you're also expecting income support from the government?
That's a very important question that you raised, because yes, the narrative is clearly that the MSMEs, the trade, individual people require a lot of support. But large business, as Uday was saying, also requires support, because large business also means large costs. So let's take it very simply. You have very little or zero revenue. You can do away with variable costs, but you have large fixed costs. You also have your meter ticking. Apart from employees, you also have to pay the banks. You also have to service your loans. So there has to be some support to the large industry as well.
No, but when industrialists say this and people in government listen, they message or they call to say, next time somebody says this, you please ask him that government resources are limited, GST collections in any case have fallen, our revenues are very, very stretched this time. We have to first overcome this crisis, spend on healthcare, ensure that people survive, and companies also have to understand that there's a limit to what the government can do at this time.
Absolutely understand. And let me put it very bluntly. I would not like to be in the Prime Minister's or policymaker's shoes, because it is not easy at this point in time. But having said so, why I'm talking about large business are several reasons, Rahul. One is that large business is a fulcrum around which the entire ecosystem of MSMEs, suppliers, dealers, ultimately consumers is linked. And that is a very large part of employment. Now, if large businesses, I'm not saying all, but let us say stressed companies, let us say companies that are already making losses or are in difficulty, if they go under, that problem is not a business problem alone. It is a problem that comes onto banks. And from the banks, you have the issue of NPAs. Ultimately, it ravages the economy. So I think it is important enough. And government, I understand the revenues, but today is extraordinary. Normal economic measures won't work. So, for example, the government will have to perhaps think about printing its way, however controversial it might seem, printing money and finding its way out of this problem. In the US, for example, the US Fed has done a never done before move. They are actually buying out companies' debts. In the UK, the government is giving a certain percentage to each company to say, all right, this is what we will give you for wage support. This is what we will give you to support your, a special COVID situation, inactivity. So these are unconventional
Sure,
things.
but Naina Kidwai, you worked across geographies, and people in government, when they're listening to the likes of Pati Singhania, will say, you cannot compare what the Indian financial system and the Indian government can deliver with what's happening in Europe, what's happening in America, what's happening in Japan. We are not in the same weight category. We have multiple restrictions, and whatever is the best that we can do has to keep in mind the limitations the Indian government has to deal with. Ms. Kidwai.
So I would say that let's look at what others are doing and then obviously apply it to India for what makes sense. And I would agree with what Harsh has to say, because at the end of the day, if you take a sector by sector approach, so there's a problem in the auto sector. You have to look at it from soup to nuts, right down to the MSME, the supplier, the dealer, the consumer, right up to the manufacturer who is your big guy. Because there's no point looking at the tail trying to wag the dog or the head trying to wag the tail. You have to look at the entire chain. And to do that, you can't ignore, for example, in the auto sector, you could argue that the players, the manufacturers are all big boys, let them look after themselves. But in the process, when they look after themselves, there'll be delayed payments to the MSMEs. Isn't it better that you help the big guys and ensure that they in turn are paying the MSMEs early rather than late, so that you don't end up having to support the MSMEs with money for free, because you would rather that it happens the way it should. Having said that, because there has been such a setback now over the last couple of months and a sector which was already looking weak, as it turns out, our suggestions from FICCI for MSMEs is that we help with interest-free loans and collateral-free loans for a period in order, and in fact our studies show that if it's 1 lakh crore loans at, say, you take a cost of 8%, it's about 8,000 crores, which is not going to break the bank for the government. So the government providing some support to MSMEs, but on the other hand, aid big industry to help the same MSMEs that it is dependent on. Otherwise, it's only going to be government supporting MSMEs, whereas actually you need to get that entire chain supported, which will mean less dependence.
Okay. Dr. Sangita Reddy, are there any ideas that you have to offer about what industry could do to help itself? To seek help from the government is one thing, and the government says they're in the process of putting out a second stimulus package, and there'll be multiple in the weeks to come. What are the ideas that you have about how industry can collaborate across sectors to try and make life a little easier and to try and lessen the expectations and the burden on the government?
So Rahul, clearly I think industry by nature of itself springs into action the minute there's a crisis. So they are looking innovatively at what they can do with their existing infrastructure. First, they reached out to say, how can we help? So you know the textile manufacturers are now manufacturing PPE. There's a social intent, but also now people who are in automobiles and defense are now looking at what can we do in medical equipment manufacturing. So I think industry is being creative, is being proactive, and is bracing for the impact. But I think that's not what we're looking for. For a minute, let me just, kind of reset. We made history with that lockdown. We have definitely as a country, and we're proud of this, by the fact that, we are going to emerge out of this relatively unscathed. But we also need to understand that unless we do something soon, then the impact of the economic crisis is going to be far higher. The second thing is, everybody is calling it unprecedented, but we're not talking about creating a new rule book. All the facts which are being looked at of, FRBM norms or solvency or ratings or all these, is the old rule book. Why don't we figure out how we create a significant surplus and use this surplus to support business continuity, to re-stimulate demand, and then build new innovative industries for the future, manufacturing clusters, agri-processing, infrastructure investments, use the MNREGA, but get our roads and infra in place. And with this will emerge a new strong India. The funding that we take in today, and say the stimulus demand package that we put together, and it's government and industry together, we do it together and say that the tax generation is going to double or triple in the next 36 to 48 months, and you put a COVID test on that and say we will repay whatever we have raised. So I think we're not asking for the sake of asking. We are asking because unless you keep industry alive, the economy, the country, and the people of India will suffer. And unless you do it quickly, the longer you wait, the tougher it's going to be to recover. So this is not, and if you look at the package that FICCI had asked for, the number one request was really to support the vulnerable, put money in their hands. You saw that picture of people hiding in a cement mixer truck. people trying to go home. You're seeing the picture of farmers, who's starving. You see children on the street. And urban poor is actually a sadder case than the rural poor. So we understand that. So first, put money in the hands of these people. Second is ensure business continuity, both for the MSME and for the large sector. The third and important aspect is please look at the healthcare, because if you lose your health security, you have lost too much for the country. Keep your hospitals and nursing homes alive. Then we move on to say invest in the future of the country, like I said, with roads, with agri, with new age industry and
now, Rashesh,
so it's a uniform package, but the only point I'm trying to say is let's change the rules of the game and let's dream for a strong India together. This is not just about the government giving money. This is about industry, people, and the government all working together. And the last point which I want to make, which I think is important in this context, is we have to remove the fear and bring back the confidence. And that is, I think, at the root of all the initiatives that we take.
Rashesh Shah, the financial sector was already stressed.
Yeah.
The ghost of bad loans hanging over the NBFC sector. Now, after what happened with Franklin Templeton, we've seen a bit of a meltdown in the corporate debt sector, especially for non-AAA rated bonds. What do you think should be done? The RBI has already fired all the bazookas that it possibly could. What can be done more at the fiscal level by the government to try and ensure that there is solidarity, there is strength and some sense of confidence in the financial services sector?
Absolutely. Actually, you have raised a very important part, because financial system is like the blood in the body. The liquidity needs to flow, and what we have seen over the last 18 months, but also over the last few weeks, is there is an extreme amount of risk aversion, and as a result of that, the markets are frozen. So if you see, the economy, like we all talk about opening up again, but I always believe that closing was maybe easier because it was a very binomial. It was one single shot, you close the economy. But opening up is going to be very gradual, very calibrated, and the government, the central government, the state government, the industry, the workers, the individuals will all have to revive confidence for the opening up to happen. You can't open up by order. You will have to open up by installing confidence. And one of the ways of installing confidence is to get cash flows started, get liquidity started again, because everybody in the month of April, cash flows have dried up. An average company's cash inflow were about 5 to 10% of normal, but the cash outflows were still 30-40% of normal. So I think we need to get the liquidity flowing. What RBI has done has been a good thing. They've tried to pump liquidity, but unfortunately we have a financial system which is very banking dependent. So if you look at credit flow in the economy, they come via mutual funds, via the bond market, they come via NBFCs, and they come via banks. Now 18 months ago, I think NBFCs had their own issues after ILFS, so NBFC flow of credit has been choked. Now with the Templeton issue, the bond markets have also got dislocated. The banks have, because of the NPAs of the last 5 years, have become extremely risk averse, and except for AAA or government companies, nobody is getting credit.
No, but what's the solution? Because credit offtake was already at a historic low for about 2 decades. There hadn't been as low a credit offtake as there was even before the pandemic. Now to that trouble has got added the virus. What's the vaccine that you can inject into the financial services sector?
So basically, as we say, there has to be somebody providing liquidity of the last resort. We need somebody to even backstop risk, like for example, MSME loans and all that. If the banks are not keen on taking that risk, the government or RBI needs to backstop. We need credit guarantee. We need credit enhancement for MSME loans. This is not new. This is happening all over the world. Governments and central banks are saying we are the risk takers of the last resort. We can take the risk because somebody needs to take the risk. If the world becomes risk averse, everything dries up. So when you ask how do we reopen again, we need to get confidence back. We need to get liquidity back. And one of the ways of saying is not pass the buck to the banks only, but maybe the RBI, maybe the government can say, I will backstop the risk. I will do the credit
Ms.
guarantee.
Motwani, you spoke about the need to revive demand. But confidence and demand aren't buttons you can switch on and off. At a time when people are worried about whether they'll have a job, it's highly unlikely that somebody will say, let me go out and buy an electric two-wheeler or a three-wheeler or a four-wheeler because I myself don't know whether I have a job or not. So therefore, How can you revive demand when there is so much uncertainty about the job market itself?
I think you raised a very valid point, and I think that's the first thing that we need to do. I think we need to first start saying that we are ready to jumpstart. That the focus has been on saving lives. I think the focus has to also shift now to saving livelihoods. And right from the top leadership of the nation, to leaders of our states, and all across, I think the message has to go out that we are ready to jumpstart, that we want to get the economy going, we want to open businesses, we want to try to return to life as a normal life and learn to live with the virus. And maybe a nationalistic message that nothing can stop India. Because I think it's first, people are in a fear psychosis, they need to start feeling better, they need to start feeling more confident. I think this is the most urgent need of the hour, that there is a positive rhetoric, a narrative which is confident, that starts spreading over the next few weeks through media and through all the leaders speak. And then second thing is speed and urgency. I think the urgency to kickstart the economy has to be shown at all levels. Problems have to be solved. Whatever support the government can afford, whatever support package we come to, and a consensus along with the industry should be implemented quickly. I think businesses are on ventilators. MSMEs and large businesses are on ventilators. So I think we have to act before the patient dies. And we need to take quick decisions. We need to keep it simple. And the problem is complex, but some of the simpler solutions can be implemented very quickly, so that we can think about, as I said, bringing the customers back and bringing people back to work. Yeah. And I think that is the first, the mindset we need to work on all across the nation.
One of the key challenges
confidence
and concerns for those watching is, how do you ensure that there is as less job loss as possible? How do you ensure there's no bloodbath on the factory floor? You're watching an India Today Jumpstart special conversation with some of the top names of Indian business. I'll return with part 2 of this conversation on the other side of a very quick break. Stay with us. Welcome back. You're watching an Conversation. This is the Jumpstart India E-Conclave, and joining me on this broadcast, Dr. Sangita Reddy, Joint Managing Director, Apollo Hospitals, also the President of the Federation of Indian Chambers of Commerce and Industry, Uday Shankar, President of the Walt Disney Company Asia Pacific and Chairperson of Star India, Naina Kidwai, Founder, Country Head HSBC, Rashesh Shah, Chairperson and CEO of the Edelweiss Group, Pati, Singhania, Vice Chairperson and Managing Director of JK Papers, Sulajja, Firodia, Motwani, Founder and Chief Executive Officer of Kinetic Green and Power Solutions. Now, one of the key challenges at this moment is to give employees and industries a clear roadmap about what happens next so that they can plan how to start reviving their companies. But the problem with that, Pati Singhania, is that at this moment, you're dealing with an invisible enemy. The virus has a mind of its own. He's not under anybody's control, and therefore, how do you revive confidence? How do you lay out a very clear, graded roadmap when there's an invisible enemy still who's willing and waiting to strike?
I think you've made a very vital point. Confidence building is the key, and this has to go across sections of society. It is not an issue of business or workers. It is you and me as citizens. If we have to go out, even if the shops are open, we need to go there. We need to be confident that if I go there, nothing is going to happen to me. Because the reality is the virus is not going to go away. So we all need to work together to do this messaging, to explain this to people. And it's the government, it is the media, it is business, which will have to do this. The second is, as far as money starts flowing, and when people have greater confidence that they can actually spend money and they don't have to look only at a survival mode, then they start becoming more confident in terms of going out and creating demand. So I would say that these two are critical factors in generating confidence in doing this. And also, of course, the health that we are in the days of the lockdown, we have been able to gear up to look at health and safety and sanity.
Uday Shankar, how do we ensure that job losses are minimized? The government so far has given a diktat, you can't sack. We know that's not working because several companies, especially the smaller and medium-sized companies, are laying off or sending people on furlough. What's your sense of how to deal with this problem in the larger economy and ensure that job losses are minimized to the extent that is possible?
Rahul, first and foremost, I think we have to recognize that it's a brutal reality that if people can't afford to pay their employees, they won't be able to pay their employees. Even if they get arrested or even if they are shot before a firing squad, if they can't pay, they can't pay. And that's a situation right from the individuals who employ in their domestic capacity to the corporates, big and small, and everyone in between. Nobody wants to fire people. You hire people because you use them to produce more, to sell more, and to make more money. So clearly getting rid of people is an option of the last resort. So some kind of, it's a socially everybody should be aware, and I think it was the right thing for the government to say that in the middle of the lockdown, as far as possible, people should not be laid off so that they can have the certainty of some earning. But that cannot be a perpetual situation unless, as Rashesh was saying, that there's some kind of backstopping, some kind of support, some kind of comfort. After all, there must be some wisdom in the fact that governments across the world are trying to step up and help people, pick up the salary bills. And it's really important in this country that we do this at all levels, because without that, I don't think we will be able to carry on with the same number of employees, with much lower production, with much lower sales, and with a massive setback to business. Life has changed and business cannot be as usual. That's the most important thing. Second thing that we need to recognize is that it's important to make sure that at every level there is some capacity for people to feel bold and entrepreneurial. People can take risks, but there has to be, there is already a huge fear on account of the virus. And then if there is fear that if we do something and my business fails, then I'm going to be left holding the can on my working capital, on my debt, on my other liabilities. It's going to be a massive problem. So the government needs to step in there and build an environment and take concrete initiatives to make sure that people are given the confidence that enterprises can go out and do what they're good at, and if they fail, they will be looked after.
Naina Kidwai, one of the things that we're hearing from government is that this is an opportunity for India to try and get some of the manufacturing that's now moving out of China and bring that to India, because global value chains are being reordered. But this has been true for a long time now. We haven't been able to capitalize so far. Most of the manufacturing going to countries like Vietnam, some even going to countries like Bangladesh and Myanmar, but not coming to India. What do you think the government should do at this moment to try and turn that promise into reality?
I think first and foremost, Rahul, our market itself is a very important market. So to the extent that we were importing goods from China, and as you know that China was next to the US in terms of where we were importing goods, let's at least look at substituting that in terms of manufacture in India. And I say this because today we don't know which countries are going to put barriers, artificial or otherwise, down in terms of exports, because that is the big change in the world right now. Trade flows across the world are going to be affected. So maybe we can't build our hopes on new exports or supply chains right away, much as we must continue to look at it. But at a minimum, we can certainly get that manufacture which doesn't have to rely on other parts of the world, but feeds the Indian market. And I think, it's toys, it's furniture, it's small goods, it's all kinds of things which we can absolutely manufacture here. So I think looking at that opportunity is one. I think there's another thing we can learn from China. It is how quickly Wuhan bounced back. And let's look at those mechanisms, because I still, take heart from the fact that if 9 to 12 months is what people in industry who were polled by FICCI believe is what it takes to return to normalcy, that isn't bad. It's not like a recession after the World War, which goes on for 3 to 5 years for us in the country. So can we not jumpstart the economy now to shorten that 9 to 12 months return to normalcy to less?
But one of the things there is to ensure, Dr. Reddy, that there's enough containment, there's enough tracing, and you know exactly who's a threat. Now, if you saw what happened when liquor vents were opened on Monday morning, there were long queues, all social distancing went for a toss. When you compare with Wuhan, we must also keep in mind the reality of what's likely to happen in India. The moment people feel, okay, the lockdown's over, I can go, we saw a glimpse of that just as the liquor vents pan India. So how do we bounce back? Naina Kidwai talks about what happened in Wuhan. Is there at all a parallel? Is there anything we can learn from China, or do you think it's not applicable in the Indian context at all?
No, I think there are many lessons to learn, but things need to be looked at in the Indian context. You're absolutely right. And I think in that Indian context, and using the power of media, which all of you have, there is a whole aspect of messaging that for the next 12 months, factories may open, businesses should open, retail shops should open. However, wearing a mask and social distancing is a matter of saving your own life. I think it was said that, the decision to lock down was done by the Prime Minister, and it was a great decision, and the world and history will remember it. The methodology of opening up is the government, it's corporates, but it's society and individuals who can make that successful. And here, communication is key. So some of these norms have to stay with us, and therein lies the secret of being cautious but not over anxious. So like, was being said that we said offices are open, you can come to work. And this young girl rings up and said, my grandmother lives with me, lives with our home, and my father said, don't go to work. But this is not something, you can't not go to work for 12 months or 18 months, as long as it takes to get a vaccine. So we have to educate people to live with this and move on, to get the confidence. And on the earlier points, I really want to say one or two very quick things. That banks need the confidence to lend, and that must come by some level of a backstop from the government. Because if you look at the data, while the RBI enables 1.5 lakh crores to be dispensed. I had a group of bankers talking to me this morning and said less than 4,000 crores has really gone out. So we need to create confidence in the business community, create appropriate behavior and confidence in the public, and then we move together towards restarting the economy.
No, we were already seeing an increasing level of debt phobia, especially in India and globally past beyond the 2008 financial crisis. Rashesh, we've heard that the RBI is trying to ensure that there's enough liquidity. Everybody says there's enough liquidity, but nobody is taking a loan because they are paranoid. So there's a huge level of debt phobia. Any ideas around how to deal with that? There's also a 3-month moratorium at this time for interest and principal repayment. To what extent can it be feasible? Can it be feasibly extended?
Yeah, I think it should be extended. If it's going to take, between at least 8-9 months for normalcy to come, we need to be able to give that kind of moratorium to customers. But I think what you said is very true. If you want to get the economy started again, you will need credit flow again. And we are always confusing liquidity is equal to credit flow. Liquidity is required, but it's not equal to credit flow like we have it now. We have a lot of liquidity. The banks are putting 7 lakh crores back with RBI in reverse repo and not being able to give it out to as credit to the users of the credit. So I think the credit phobia, as you said, is real. Somebody needs to break the logjam, and we need to do that to ensure that this healthcare epidemic does not become an economic epidemic. The healthcare epidemic will get solved at some point. We'll get the vaccine, people will get herd immunity, whatever is the outcome that is going to happen on that. But the economic epidemic may take a long time to solve, and we need to forestall that. We need to do things now so that it does not become an epidemic. And for that, I think, as you said, credit flow, liquidity, confidence, and getting the economy started by taking risk is very important. And government and RBI can take risk. The businesses will take risk. The businesses are in the business of taking risk, and they will also follow through on this to make sure we get our economy started again.
Okay,
and not
so
go into
let me put
depression.
that question to Sulajja, Firodia, Motwani, because the banks will say we have enough liquidity and yet no one is coming and taking credit. How do you think we can, when a black swan moment like the pandemic comes, risk appetite is only natural to be hit. How do you think we can work towards trying to instill confidence? What should be done, Ms. Motwani?
I think that it's not an easy problem to solve, but I think there have to be some focused efforts. Some of the larger sectors, let's say like automotive sectors, it employs almost 4 crore people, contributes close to half of the manufacturing sector GDP. I think if the government and the industry can work together in a collaborative manner, there's not one solution that fits all. But if you prioritize certain sectors which are going to bring back the jobs, which are going to bring back business and create demand, then I think we can sit across the table with the decision makers, the policy makers, and come up with solutions across the table, for the MSMEs in the industry, for the dealers who are facing the customers, for the manufacturers who are taking the risk and investing in further building the business in these uncertain scenarios. So I think this time calls for collaboration. It calls for focused efforts and quick solutions. So I think this is really what is required to really get started with making a difference. This is what I believe.
What we've seen over the past 1 hour are a sense of imminently sensible ideas that can be worked on. There is no breast beating about what's gone wrong, rather positive approach about what needs to be done from here on to start bringing the economy back to life. And saving jobs clearly a priority, and there collaboration between industry, the people we have on our screens right now, and government, very, very crucial. Dr. Sangita Reddy, Naina Kidwai, Rashesh Shah, Pati Singhania, Sulajja Firodia Motwani, and last but not least, Uday Shankar, for joining us in a completely different avatar from the one that we were used to. Thank you very much. It's been a delight talking to all of you. We'll have a lot more for you in this continuing series, Jumpstart. We'll be back Wednesday, 7 p.m. The 3 poster boys of